This is Johnny Midnight, and you're listening to the voice of a dead man walking. The mysterious DJ's words crackled through Memphis radios at 3:33 a.m. on August 13, 1977. For 3 hours and 33 minutes, all of Memphis listened to what would become known as the Ghost DJ broadcast, Elvis Presley's final confession, delivered 3 days before his death to an audience who didn't know they were hearing a goodbye. The FCC tried to trace the signal but found it was coming from inside WHBQ, from a studio that was supposedly empty and locked. Security footage showed nobody entering or leaving, but 47,000 people heard the broadcast, recorded it, and what those tapes revealed would suggest that Elvis didn't die on August 16th. He killed himself after confessing everything to a city that made him and destroyed him. To understand how Elvis Presley became a pirate DJ confessing to his own murder, we need to go back 1 week, August 6, 1970. Elvis was at Graceland, deteriorating rapidly. His last tour had been a disaster. He could barely remember lyrics, barely stand, barely pretend to be Elvis anymore. Dr. Nick had just delivered news that his liver was failing. 6 months at most, probably less. Elvis made a decision. He would die on his own terms, but first he needed to confess. The plan was simple but insane. WHBQ Radio, where DJ Dewey Phillips had first played That's All Right in 1954, had a security flaw Elvis knew about from his early days hanging around the station, a maintenance tunnel connected to Graceland's storm drains, a route Elvis had used as a teenager to sneak into the station and watch the DJs work. 23 years later, dying and desperate, he would use it one last time. Have you ever needed to tell the truth so badly that you'd risk everything just to be heard? That's where Elvis was on August 13, 1970. At 2:30 a.m., he slipped out of Graceland through the kitchen entrance. The Memphis Mafia was asleep, knocked out by the Placidils Elvis had slipped into their drinks. He drove himself, something he hadn't done in years, in a borrowed maintenance truck, wearing coveralls and a baseball cap. The king of rock and roll, disguised as a janitor, returning to where it all began. The tunnel was smaller than he remembered, or he was larger. Crawling through decades of accumulated grime, his knees scraping concrete, his breathing labored from the exertion and the drugs. It took him 45 minutes to travel what should have been a 10-minute journey, but at 3:25 a.m., he emerged in WHBQ's basement, used the emergency key hidden since 1954, and entered Studio C, the overnight booth that was supposed to be running on automation. At 3:33 a.m., Elvis flipped the switch and went live. This is Johnny Midnight, and you're listening to the voice of a dead man walking. For the next few hours, I'm going to tell you the truth about someone you think you know, someone who died a long time ago but kept performing his own death. This is the real story of Elvis Presley, told by someone who knew him better than anyone, because I am him, and I'm already gone. The overnight engineer Tom Brennan was asleep in the break room. He woke to the sound of a voice that shouldn't exist coming from a studio that should be empty. Racing to Studio C, he found the door locked from inside. Through the window he could see a figure hunched over the microphone, face hidden by the cap, but the hands, Tom would later swear those were Elvis's hands, with the exact same rings. For the first hour, Johnny Midnight told stories only Elvis could know. His first kiss with Dixie Locke under the Overton Park shell, the exact words Gladys said when she was dying, the real reason he was drafted, a deal with the government to avoid prosecution for interstate transportation of a minor, a trumped-up charge involving a 17-year-old fan. Details that had never been public, couldn't be public, unless you were Elvis himself. The calls started coming in. Memphis was waking up to something unprecedented. The voice was Elvis, but different. No accent management, no performance, just raw Memphis drawl and exhaustion. Callers were put on air without screening. "Is this really Elvis?" a woman asked. "Elvis died in 1958, ma'am. I'm just the ghost that kept singing," the DJ replied. The second hour got darker. Johnny Midnight began confessing to crimes. The 2 men he'd killed in self-defense that were covered up, the bribes to police, the connections to the Memphis Mafia that went beyond friendship into actual organized crime. He named names, dates, amounts. He talked about drug deals, about Dr. Nick being forced to supply him at gunpoint, about threatening to have people killed if they exposed his secrets. "You want to know why Elvis is dying?" the DJ asked. "Because Elvis has been dead since 1958 when his mama died. Everything after that was just momentum, a corpse that kept moving because the music hadn't stopped. But the music's about to stop. 3 days from now, August 16th, Elvis Presley will officially die. But he's been gone for 19 years. This is just the funeral announcement." The station manager, Harold Brennan, no relation to Tom, arrived at 4:45 a.m. after multiple calls. He tried to cut the broadcast, but the emergency switches had been disabled. The transmitter was locked on. broadcasting at power levels that shouldn't have been possible. The FCC was calling, threatening to pull their license, but Harold was transfixed. This was Elvis. Had to be. Nobody else knew that Harold had given Elvis his first tour of the station in 1953, that Elvis had carved EP plus DL into the bathroom stall door that was still there. Have you ever heard someone writing their own obituary in real time? The third hour was the most devastating. Johnny Midnight began talking about suicide. Not abstract but specific. Elvis has 1,000 Placidals, 500 Percodans, and 300 Dilodids hidden in his bathroom. On August 16th, he's going to take enough to ensure he never wakes up. It won't be an accidental overdose. It will be deliberate, calculated. The final performance of a man who's tired of performing. He gave the exact location of suicide notes hidden around Graceland, inside specific books, behind particular paintings. Notes to Lisa Marie, to Vernon, to Priscilla. He read portions of them on air, words that would later be found exactly where he said they'd be. Lisa Marie, Daddy didn't leave you. Daddy just went home to Gladys. Be better than I was. Be real in a way I never could be. Callers were sobbing on air. Some begged Johnny Midnight to stop Elvis. Others begged Elvis to stop himself. One caller, an old woman, said simply, "I know it's you, Elvis. I was at your first show at the Overton Shell. You looked right at me and winked. You can rest now, honey. We'll remember the boy you were, not the ghost you became." The DJ went silent for 13 seconds, then whispered, "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for seeing me when I was still real." At 6:30 a.m., as dawn broke over Memphis, Johnny Midnight began his final segment. He played recordings, not music but conversations. Elvis talking to his mother's grave. Elvis planning his own death with someone whose voice was disguised but sounded like Dr. Nick. Elvis crying alone in his bedroom, begging God to let him die. These recordings had never been released, never even known to exist. They could only have been made by Elvis himself. "Memphis," the DJ said as the sun hit the studio windows. "You made Elvis Presley, and you killed him too. You put him on a pedestal so high that he forgot how to walk on the ground. You loved an image so much that the man behind it suffocated. But I don't blame you. I blame Elvis for not being strong enough to say no, for choosing the image over the truth, for dying in 1958 and pretending to live for 19 more years." At 7:06 a.m. the broadcast ended with these words. "This has been Johnny Midnight, the ghost of Elvis Presley, signing off for the last time. In 3 days, you'll find the body. But remember, you heard the soul leave 3 days before. I'm already gone. The flesh just hasn't figured it out yet. Goodbye, Memphis. Thank you for the music. Sorry for the lie." The studio door was found unlocked and open. No one was inside. The console was still warm, the chair still impressed with the shape of a body, but Johnny Midnight was gone. Security footage from that night would later mysteriously disappear. The only evidence was the recordings made by listeners and the station's own archives, which the FCC immediately confiscated. Tom Brennan, the overnight engineer, quit that day. He swore he'd seen Elvis walk out of the studio and simply vanish at the end of the hallway. "He looked at me," Tom said, "and he was transparent. I could see through him. He smiled and said, 'Tell them I was here. Tell them I said goodbye.'" August 16th, 1977. Elvis Presley was found dead in his bathroom, exactly as Johnny Midnight had predicted. The drugs mentioned were found in the exact quantities stated. The suicide notes were discovered precisely where the DJ had said they'd be. But the official story remained: accidental overdose. The notes were destroyed by Vernon, who couldn't bear the shame of suicide. But 47,000 people in Memphis knew the truth. They'd heard Elvis confess, predict, and execute his own death. They had recordings, though most were confiscated or destroyed over the years. A few survive, crackling with AM static, the voice undeniably Elvis but also undeniably otherworldly. The ghost DJ broadcast became Memphis legend, spoken of in whispers, denied by authorities. POJBQ lost its license in 1978, officially for technical violations, unofficially for broadcasting the confession of a dead man 3 days before he died. The station building was demolished in 1980, but maintenance workers report that on August 13th each year, at 3:33 a.m., you can still hear broadcasting from the empty lot, a voice claiming to be Johnny Midnight, telling the truth about Elvis Presley, confessing to murders and suicide, saying goodbye to a city that loved him to death. The FCC investigation concluded that the broadcast was a hoax, possibly by an impersonator, but they never explained how the impersonator knew about the suicide notes, the exact drug quantities, the date of death. They never explained the recordings of private conversations, the details only Elvis could know, the voice that was analyzed and proved to be identical to Elvis's acoustic signature. Dr. Nick, when asked about the broadcast years later, said only, Elvis was in many places those final days. His body, his soul, his voice, they weren't always in the same location. Could he have been at WHBQ? Could he have been at Graceland? Could he have been both? When you're that close to death, the boundaries become flexible. The truth is that for 3 hours and 33 minutes on August 13, 1977, Elvis Presley used the medium that made him famous to deliver his own eulogy. He became a pirate DJ broadcasting from beyond the grave, confessing to a city that created and destroyed him. Whether it was Elvis in the flesh, Elvis's spirit, or something else entirely, 47,000 people heard the king say goodbye. And in the end, that's what ghosts are. Voices that need to be heard one last time before they can rest. Elvis found his voice not on stage, not in the studio, but in a locked radio booth at 3:33 a.m., speaking as Johnny Midnight, already dead but still broadcasting, telling Memphis that the music was about to stop. 3 days later, it did.